What's going on, guys? Rob 3 Strong here. I've recently talked about nutrition facts and how to read the labels on the back of food packages. Today I have a stripped down version of the nutrition facts, the most important things you need to focus on. So last time I went over everything, serving size all the way through the carbohydrates, the fats, and the protein and all that stuff, things that you don't really need to worry about, and then the key things that you do need to focus on. Well, there are a lot of different types of foods that do have labels. You know, most of those are the processed foods, and like I said before, you don't really see the produce section or in the produce section any labels on those foods because there's no additives, there's nothing, it's in its natural state, and so therefore legally food companies don't have to put anything in there because it's the way it was meant to be. Okay, so there's really nothing to hide. Nature's not trying to fool us. But anyway, in nature, there are certain things. Most foods, all foods, essentially contain a little bit of all three of these nutrients. But it's the amount of each of those nutrients that changes. Okay? So you will actually find, in nature, you will find 2 out of 3 of these things in large quantities with very little exceptions. To my point, so let's take an apple. An apple is relatively sweet, it's a fruit, so it has sugar in it. So the carbohydrate content is going to be higher than the fat content, and it's going to be higher than the protein content. Is there any fat in an apple? No. So the fat is going to be very, very low, if not zero. We already know the carbohydrate content is going to be relatively high. Is there some protein? Yes, very little. Let's take meat. Let's take a chicken breast. Is there fat in chicken? Yes, in some forms if it's not a skinless chicken breast. But in animal proteins, you will have fat and you will have protein. You will have 2 of these things. Will you have carbohydrates? Not really. So we will have these 2 together. What happens when we change it? What happens when we have, say, a processed food where we have multiple ingredients that were at some point a natural whole food, say like wheat or some sort of grain or something, and we ground it down into flour to kind of emulsify this thing, to put it together, we need some sort of fat, butter or egg yolk or something to hold this together. So we're going to take a relatively floury, starchy, sugary substance, mix it with a fat so this thing stays together. That's why if you have low-fat things, they tend to crumble. Now what we've done is we've added these 2 things that in nature aren't really combined, because these are 2 major fuel sources. So for the most part, if we're eating meat, well, we get most of our fuel from the fat. If we eat fruit, we get most of our fuel from the carbohydrates. What we have done as human beings is we have taken the fatty products and the sugary products and put them together into one piece because these 2 things taste really awesome, plus sodium. And so when we have something like a bread, a muffin, a cookie, any one of those things, we can see that there's a relatively high carbohydrate content because it's usually a flour-based thing, and a relatively high fat content. And so in previous videos, I've explained that any excess carbohydrates that our body doesn't utilize gets stored as fat. Well, what also happens is our body primarily uses carbohydrates as a fuel source. Not that that's most important, but it's easier to break down than fat. So we're going to use the fuel source that is broken down the fastest, which means that if we consume a lot of carbohydrates with fat, what we'll essentially do is use up the sugar and go, well, we're good, we don't need the rest. So the extra carbs goes into fat stores, and the extra fat, guess what? Gets put into the fat stores. That's why that cookie is even bad. That's why that ice cream is even worse, because now we're having large quantities of these 2 things that don't naturally occur together in foods, okay? At least in large quantities. So the next time you are looking at your food labels, make sure that, you have these two things or these two things, not a lot of these two things together. So if you have high numbers on the top two, the fat and the carbs, minimize it. Rarely have it. Okay? See you next time.